as a technical specialist, Will supports teams throughout USACE with integration of climate adaptation and resilience into designs and other studies, and through ATR and policy compliance reviews. He is a national subject matter expert in the areas of sea level change adaptation and inland hydrology non-stationarity, is a member of numerous interagency teams, and has served on international partnerships missions in the Netherlands, Brazil, and South Korea. Mr. Veach holds a BA degree in environmental studies with a focus in hydrology from the University of Colorado and an MS degree in hydrology from the University of Arizona. He is a registered professional hydrologist with the American Institute of Hydrology, and we are so thankful you are here today. Thank you.
Our second panelist is Tyler Anthrop, and Tyler is the Director of Planning and Strategy for the Sewerage and Water Board of New Orleans, where he oversees strategic and system planning. He has a decade of experience in sustainable urban water management, mostly working in New Orleans to implement green infrastructure solutions to flooding. He previously served as the Urban Water Program Manager with the City of New Orleans Office of Resilience and Sustainability, and as a planner of the City Planning Commission at the CGR Incorporated. His work has included development and implementation of New Orleans' first stormwater code, works and plans and such as the work on plans such as the New Orleans Main Street Resilience Plan, Housing NOLA, and authorizing the economic benefits section of the Greater New Orleans Urban Water Plan. He holds a master's degree in sustainable real estate development from Tulane University and a bachelor's degree in urban planning and design from the University of Missouri, Kansas City.
Next up, we have this lovely pair from Mastodon, which is a stormwater management and construction company with a vision of a city that embraces water while also creating urban ecosystems that can improve the quality of life for a community. Mastodon seeks to provide a holistic approach to historic renovations and stormwater management systems, while also calling attention to environmental and socioeconomic justice issues by offering apprenticeships to minority youth and community, establishing a lab garden for research and development to tackle local stormwater and food desert issues, and hosting educational workshops and programming for the community. Arian Hall is a Baton Rouge native who attended Loyola University, New Orleans, with a focus of arts in music. During her work teaching with various orchestra nonprofits after college, Arian learned of the AmeriCorps program and the great benefit assisting in rebuilding New Orleans could provide. While working with the St. Bernard Project, she gained hard skills in carpentry, building, and reading architectural plans. In 2015, Arian retained an install position with Evans & Leiter Landscape Architecture, where she received training in permaculture practices, sustainability, and construction of stormwater management systems. She now holds over 6 years of experience in the construction and stormwater management field. And she is paired with Luisa Abale, who hails from bustling New York and is a graduate of Fordham University, where she studied sociology and visual arts with a concentration in painting and drawing. While at Fordham, she became passionate about service work and diversity peer education. She continued this work upon moving to New Orleans in 2011, first serving in AmeriCorps and then as a carpentry manager at SBP. Permaculture techniques and stormwater management became a focus, as well as flooding posed a constant threat for homeowners that Luisa encountered that were attempting to rebuild. Luisa joined Evans & Leiter team as a project manager in 2015, where she continues to gain knowledge and expertise installing stormwater management systems and landscapes. Luisa is a licensed horticulturist and has a passion for teaching the skills of the trade in stormwater and ecological systems. Thank you so much for being here.
Our next panelist is Willie Ottman. Originally from Meridian, Mississippi, Willie moved to New Orleans in 1989. Prior to Hurricane Katrina, he worked as a scheduler with the Regional Transit Authority. After Katrina, Willie, like many New Orleans, lost his job, but he decided to stay in New Orleans to help rebuild the city. Heeding the advice of his mother, who used to say, "Learn how to do more than one thing," Willie turned to construction skills he learned as a young man and served as a construction manager for various youth build programs in New Orleans and the surrounding areas. According to Willie, what he enjoys most about working with young adults is seeing them gain the confidence and skills that they need to be successful in their lives. Willie holds a Bachelor's of Science in Education and Technology from Jackson State University and has a few certifications: National Center for Construction Education and Research, Clearwater Certification, and Building Performance Institution certification. He continues to live with his family in New Orleans. Thank you for coming, Willie.
And poor Willie just found out he was coming today because his boss is Chuck Morissette, the executive director of Thrive New Orleans, and he had an emergency come up. So thank you for coming last minute. We appreciate it so much.
And lastly, our next panelist is Sam, a 2019 Loyola graduate and is the Urban Conservancy Program Manager for the Front Yard Initiative and Building Active Stewardship in New Orleans programs. The FYI is an incentive and educational program that helps homeowners remove impermeable surface from their properties and install green infrastructure to help reduce localized flooding. Basin is a water stewardship summer program for school-age children that teaches living with water, principles through fun and experimental learning. Sam graduated with honors from Loyola University, New Orleans, with a bachelor's degree in environmental science with a concentration in biological sciences, and is a fellow from the Institute for Environmental Communication, is GIP certified, and is currently becoming a master naturalist. She is personally and professionally invested in creating a more resilient, water-smart New Orleans. Thank you all for coming.
Hi, I'm Olivia Guerra. I'm a sophomore here at Loyola. I'm an environment student studying with a concentration in biology, and I'm here to ask you guys your first question. What role does your organization play in water management of southeastern Louisiana?
Yes, we're going this way.
So we can go in order if you would like. Actually, for this first question, let's go in order because I placed y'all in order for a reason. The feds, then the city, and we go from there, okay? So the feds are first, and then after that, we'll just take it in any order. Sound good?
Sounds good. Well, thank you for that very warm welcome. It's my pleasure to be here tonight. You knew it had to be an Army communication because there was an undefined acronym in there, so I apologize for the ATR. That's Agency Technical Review. I should have put that in there. The other thing that I left out of the bio is that I'm also a 2011 fellow of the Institute for Environmental Communication. So great to see you, Dr. Thomas and Dr. Thomas. It's great to be back at Loyola. So actually, the 2011 year that I was a fellow was an interesting one because it was the largest flood in the history of the Mississippi River, the largest flood measured anyway. The 27 flood would have been larger if it had been contained in the levees. But so that year I was balancing trying to be an environmental communications fellow with water management. And I think in New Orleans, when we think about water management, we often think about stormwater management, local water management in our streets. And the Corps of Engineers doesn't typically get involved in that scale of water management. There's a rule, it's in our legal authorities called the 800 CFS rule. It says that if your river or water course doesn't have a 10-year flood of at least 800 cubic feet per second, it's not a federal responsibility. It's not a Corps responsibility. It's not any federal agency's responsibility. It's a local responsibility. But there's a unique project in New Orleans called the Southeast Louisiana Project that was specifically authorized. So it doesn't have to abide by that rule. And in any case, I think some streets in New Orleans would meet it anyhow. But because of a flood that happened in May of 1995, there was the specific project that was authorized to improve drainage in New Orleans. And so the Corps of Engineers here, but not in most places, is involved in local stormwater management in terms of conveying water to the perimeter. And then, of course, in the entire hurricane and storm damage risk reduction system that sort of keeps water out on a day-to-day basis and closes down for storms to keep stormwater out. But on top of that, the Corps of Engineers does also have a very big role in water management, but on a different scale, a larger scale. So projects like the Mississippi River and Tributaries Project that includes the Bonacary Spillway, the Morganza Floodway, the Old River Control Complex. These are sort of the really big water management projects that I think oftentimes operate kind of in the background for a lot of people. I think people in this room are aware of them. And if you're in one of the programs that I just heard about, I'm sure you've learned all about them. But I think for a lot of people, sort of the larger river systems of the United States get managed kind of silently and in the background. But if you're interested in that kind of thing, I really encourage you to read up on some of these large water management projects, because it's really fascinating. And I really am glad to hear that we've got some environmental studies majors here, because I was an environmental studies undergraduate, and now I work with all of these engineers. And we are so important, us liberal arts majors in that room, you know. Engineers love to fix things, but their favorite way to fix things is to try it and see. And I'm usually the one who has to come in and say, wait, that's not a question. You know, it's not a testable hypothesis. You know, let's look at the bigger picture here. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, I really encourage you to pursue whatever avenue you're interested in professionally. You can be an engineer, you can be a scientist. It's really worked out well for me. So those are just a few things. And then, of course, as you mentioned in my intro, I'm currently leading the Climate Preparedness and Resilience program for the Corps of Engineers, which is just a huge honor, and it's really an amazing time to be working in that space. So I would also just add that the other way that the Corps is involved in water management is in terms of building in climate preparedness into all of our projects, whether it's sea level rise or consideration of changes in flow frequency and rain frequency. You know, we can't just build based on the data we collected in the past or even in the present. We really have to build for the climate of the future when this project has to be counted on to perform. So those are just a few ways that our organization is involved. I'd like to hear from the other panels, and I'd be happy to take questions, of course.
Yeah, and thanks again as well for the invite tonight. I think this is the first in-person panel I've been to in a long time, so it's a bit strange, but it's nice. Obviously, the role that our organization plays in water management in southeastern Louisiana is pretty huge, at least for the city of New Orleans. You know, when we were created about 120 years ago, we were really the governance model for the world in terms of how to form public, accountable public water and wastewater utility. Our governance model, in fact, was the model that the Amsterdam Water Board is created off of. And so we're sort of unusual in the water space in that we are an independent public utility, and we also manage drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater. Most other places, there's a water utility, there's a wastewater utility. They're usually separate entities. They usually don't work on all three issues at the same time. And so the big buzzword right now in the water utility world is One Water, and how can we merge all of these three disparate but obviously very interrelated systems together. And so the Sewage and Water Board is sort of a model still to this day in terms of how you can merge all three of these different areas to integrate the management of water in all three ways. But so, you know, the role that we play locally is obviously huge, as all of you that live locally know, in that we provide you with clean and safe drinking water on a daily basis. We take your sewage and we remove it for safe return to the environment. And we partner with the city of New Orleans to drain stormwater as best as possible from the streets. Obviously, given the unique challenges that we face here, sometimes that one is a little more difficult than the other two. But so in terms of you know, the role that we play within the bounds of the levees in New Orleans, we sort of touch every single drop of water at some point in the cycle.
Thanks for having us here. So what role do we play? We're an installation company. We do the local installations of tying into city infrastructure. We're trying to help alleviate that pumping system during these really big rain events that we've been getting.
Yeah, so we essentially build and design systems for our clients to help manage water. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. Yeah, so we're your boots on the ground. We're a private construction company. Louise is a licensed horticulturalist. I'm a pervious concrete certified technician. And yeah, we pretty much try to hold the water as close to where it falls as possible. And that can look like several different systems. We can excavate with equipment to create void spaces in the ground to hold the water, or we can do it with living systems, with bioswales.
Rain gardens, you name it, bioretentions.
Fresh drains, yeah, all sorts of mitigations.
Me now. Good evening. Thank you guys for having me. Like I said, I was thrown into the fire earlier, but I guess that's what it is. It is what it is. At Thrive, we work in the community. We work with the communities, and there are a lot of people that are unemployed right now, or underemployed, from the ages 18 to 45, 50, 60 years old, you know. Here, where Thrive has an opportunity to introduce those individuals to green infrastructure. So we work with the workforce in order to get people employed, to learn a trade where they can make decent money, you know, starting from $12 on up, you know. Like I tell young people all the time, don't think because you get a Clearwater certification, you're going to go and make $34 an hour. That ain't happening, you know. But Thrive deals with the community. We help our community, and our role in organizing this is training individuals to do this work. We have two great trainers here that went through Thrive Green Academy for the business side, and
years ago.
Yeah, and it works. It's living proof.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sam, I'm going to interrupt for a minute. Willie, if you would tell I know it was in the intro, but tell what Thrive New Orleans does with the city, with the what y'all are doing in Gentilly.
Oh yes, Thrive is the resilient general contractor for the city of New Orleans. We did get lucky enough to do that, and working with different homeowners in the city, doing green gardens,
Yeah, CAP's a really cool program. So yeah, thank you for inviting me to come speak. As Verlaine said, I work for the Urban Conservancy. I do the Front Yard Initiative and the Basin Program, and our role is kind of on the education and incentive sides of it. So we are trying to get residents to learn about green infrastructure, and we don't want the Sewage and Water Board to have to touch every single drop of water. You know, that is why we flood. So we're trying to help them out on the residential end by getting, you know, just spreading the word about living with water principles. Basin particularly works with younger kids because, you know, some of this stuff you don't learn until you're adult, and that's a little ridiculous when you live in a place like New Orleans. We also try to work with a lot of the people on the panel currently. We love Macedon and Thrive, and you know, we love the Sewage and Water Board and Army Corps too, but we don't work with them as much. But yeah, so we're a little bit more on the residential side because we all have a part to play in dealing with water in New Orleans.
Hi, my name is Skylar Jones, and over the summer I participated in Loyola Academy, and I was a counselor for Basin. I go to Lusher, I'm a junior, and my question is, how does your organization contribute to ecological health and or societal impacts?
Okay. So I guess I'll just start off again. So I don't know if any of y'all have ever done a big home improvement project, but it's a little overwhelming. You want to get the right guys for the job. You don't know where to start always. Maybe you just don't know what the right thing to do is. So kind of a big role of ours is to help connect residents with resources, technical assistance, and as I said, financial assistance. So this stuff can get pretty expensive, and that's unfortunate because I do think everyone, in New Orleans should have green infrastructure. So our part is bringing it to, anyone who is very interested in it. And I'll stop there.
I'm going to ask if you will define for the audience what green infrastructure is, because I decided to not, explain that so y'all could tell, and then you just gave some examples of some things, and then it might make more sense.
Here, I'll give my definition of green infrastructure, and then I guess everyone can give theirs. It is a water management system that mimics the natural water cycle to manage stormwater. It does this by detaining, retaining, and filtering that stormwater. That's my short definition.
Pretty legit.
Yeah,
I agree with what she said.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's like textbook.
Yeah.
Plain and safe.
That was her senior thesis.
Yeah.
Yeah, so ultimately our organization can impact the ecological health of our society because we plant pollinators, trees that drink up a lot of water, that clean the air. We create natural spaces within an urban environment, which is really important because animals don't have a lot of places to go. Yeah, what else, Louisa?
Well, for societal impacts, we tie directly into a lot of nonprofit work as well. We speak a lot to different cohorts that come through launch, as well as LA Green Corps, a couple other workforce development nonprofits, WaterWise. So I think a large part of what we do is also education. We're educating a workforce, but we also educate our clients. They don't necessarily always know. They know they want something, but they don't know what.
Or they know they have a problem, but they don't know any of the steps to initiate fixing it.
A lot of times when people see flooding, they figure, I need to go up higher, need to add more dirt, and that's not the answer. I just look at it as, the clean water with the health thing, it's healthy water, healthy people. But it's everything they say.
Arian, you said that you're a pervious pavement technician. Will you explain to everybody what that means? I had to say it slowly to get it right.
Yeah, so I went through a course to get certified to install pervious concrete, which is very similar to traditional concrete, but you install it completely differently. You can use it for driveways and parking areas. They don't usually use it for drivable roads. It's just not made for that level of wear and tear. But it's a porous concrete. It mainly gets its strength from the aggregate that's inside of it. The way I would describe how it kind of looks like Rice Krispie treat. If you were to look at a cross section of it, and you can see where the water can infiltrate through the porosity of the actual concrete itself.
So where are some places y'all have put it so that if anybody wanted to go and look? I know that's where we met Chuck, who's the executive director of Thrive New Orleans, and then met you, Arian, on a project on Galvez Street. So
Jerusalem Church, right?
Yeah, I didn't pour it, but they could go check it out at one of Thrive's projects.
Yeah, at Jerusalem.
Where?
First,
Just the little parking areas?
Yeah, do you know what intersection it is? I would have to get back to you on the address.
South Galvez and near it.
And Louisiana Avenue? Or Washington? Washington.
I think it's Washington.
Yeah, it's Washington.
Okay.
Get mixed up.
Did you guys get that?
Also, all in where's that Hoffman Triangle right now? They did a huge install. All of the parking bays in that area are all pervious concrete. If you want to see larger examples of it, we're still a small business. We've only been in existence for about 3.5 years. So I actually only put in one bid for pervious concrete thus far, which makes sense because there's not a lot of residential clients that are installing it yet. You're finding that it's more private, commercial, and municipal installations. So getting there.
Well, sort of in a different way, you know, if you think about the role that water utilities play in the world, we're sort of like the original like public health and environmental organizations, and that our core mission is to provide safe and clean drinking water and treat wastewater and return it to the environment in a safe and healthy way. And so, you know, that's again like the very core of in essence of what we do on a daily basis is ensure that, you know, people have water to drink and that the sewage isn't piling up in the streets like it did before we existed. And so in terms of, you know, how our organization contributes to the ecological and societal health of the community, you know, we kind of make it possible for the community to exist in a lot of ways in terms of, you know, sustaining life here with water and wastewater treatment and draining of stormwater. So it's very elemental what we do.
Maybe, and I'm throwing this out there, so hopefully you know a little bit about it, but we visited the Paul Habens School on the West Bank this summer with our program. Can you tell people about some of those installs that y'all have done as an organization?
Sure, yeah. The Sewage and Water Board has done quite a bit of green infrastructure work around the city through a grant program that we created, I think, beginning in 2012. And so we've spent about $5 million so far on green infrastructure installs. The Haven School one on the West Bank, I think we're actually cutting the ribbon on that next week. So look out for that. It's a really large scale, probably the largest project we've done so far, really turning the entire schoolyard of a charter school over there in Algiers into a large scale detention facility and educational facility. And so we're really excited about that. And it's the first project where we've also been able to install a lot of monitoring equipment and samplers and things like that so that we can really understand the science behind green infrastructure and really make sure that as we continue to implement green infrastructure, we can use it appropriately to meet our Clean Water Act permit responsibilities and all of the compliance that we are also responsible for through federal regulations. But yeah, so the Sewage and Water Board has contributed to green infrastructure on the drainage side of things in many ways, including seeding funding to nonprofits in the first few years to groups like WaterWise, and creating lots of public education and outreach around green infrastructure. So yeah, that's really been our involvement in green infrastructure. Oh, Paul Habens Charter School.
Habans,
Yeah.
Habens.
I think it's one that's been renamed, but I don't know the new name. No, I think that's the old name.
Oh.
But it's also, once they
It's a
cut the
church.
ribbon, it's going to be open to the public after school hours, but it's going to be used for education during the school day as well. It's really neat if you go there because they left a tree just on a big tree so that they can study the decay process and they can use it in their science classes. So
we visited it over the summer with Loyola Academy, and it's really beautiful. And yeah, it's something you should really go check out. Yeah, I live in Algiers, so it's really nice to see a project like that because Algiers really doesn't have any kind of parks or anything. So I was really happy to see it.
Also, I'd like to add that they planted thousands of plants there. Real nice. So you get a chance, go visit.
Well, in terms of ecological health and societal impacts, the Army Corps of Engineers is sort of the nation's engineering and construction company, which means it's kind of all your company too, with a few levels of management in between. So I think we get in the news a lot on this front in a negative way, as a sort of a consequence or byproduct of doing engineering projects. But what maybe some people maybe not realize is that the Army Corps also has an authorized, congressionally authorized mission to do ecosystem restoration. So there are ecosystem restoration projects around the country that are executed by the Corps of Engineers to basically make landscapes more natural, make them more like they would have been in their more natural state. On top of that, when an engineering project is performed, whether it's a levee or a wall or a dam or something, there's always an environmental mitigation piece that has to occur as well. So there's always some multiple of whatever amount of land is impacted has to be restored as a part of that. So that's also an ecological impact. The Corps also has a large and growing program of beneficial use of dredged material. There's a lot of sand and sediment that's dredged out of rivers and navigation channels around the country to make them passable for navigation. And that material has to go somewhere. And there's a growing application of that to create wetlands and create ecosystems that can be a co-benefit of those navigation projects. In terms of societal impacts, I think I could give the same answer Tyler gave, which is that we sort of make it possible for society to exist in some places. On top of that, the way that the projects are planned is in terms of net benefits to the nation. So one thing about our agency is that projects have to return more value to the country than they cost. So that really gets down to societal impacts, but it's sort of societal impacts as they could be measured in dollars. And to address that, narrow-mindedness, there are other, what we call accounts that also take into account environmental acceptability, environmental justice, national development as well as regional economic development. So it's a difficult thing, but we're trying, and we're trying to get better at it in terms of accounting for all of these different sorts of benefits when we're doing a project. And I'll just also mention that the current administration is very active and very excited about environmental justice. There have been executive orders issued, and we're working with the White House and trying to figure out what the implementation is going to look like. Yeah. So making sure that the greatest negative effects of these projects don't always fall on the most disadvantaged communities. So that's one of our highest priorities we're working on right now.
Okay, so your next question is going to be, how has water management changed in New Orleans in the past 10 to 20 years?
Yeah, in the last 5 years, right? For the people who are doing the install work, for me, what I've noticed is a lot more public projects have rolled out that directly relate to stormwater management and green infrastructure. They were talking about the Cap Gentilly projects, but I've even heard about some RFPs with Sewage and Water Board and some folks with some big projects that y'all have going on, which is really awesome. And also, Green Corps and Groundwork are doing a big project on St. Bernard and Broad right now. They're doing a giant bioswale that has just passed by. So St. Bernard and Claiborne. Yeah, St. Bernard and Claiborne. Code enforcement. So the 1.25-inch rain that property owners are supposed to store. You see a lot of people that actually know about it now and are trying to do their part, the level of stewardship to actually hold and retain their own water on their own properties. And that's not just commercial properties. These are residential as well.
Say that number again for us.
1.25 inches.
In 1 hour.
In 1 hour. And in general, you just see a lot of popularity growing, a lot more people that know about what green infrastructure and stormwater management is. And they come to you they come to us with a basic knowledge or a basic understanding, but still, again, this level of stewardship. I want to be doing the right thing as a New Orleanian, as a member of my community, to hold water as close to where it's falling, to ease the stress on the pumping system. And that's what we try to stress the most, is that what we do isn't going to completely mitigate localized flooding, but it can significantly reduce the amount of stress that we're putting on the pumps, and it can save property and save things at times. You can hold 3 inches of water on your property, then if you have a 3-inch rain event, you don't see that water. So that's something that people have to take into account also.
Like Aaron said, saving money is the biggest thing in New Orleans, all over the world. said the government has spent $14.5 billion building pump stations and all this other stuff. And so Erin and her team and Sewage and Water Board and their team does these things that kind of ease the pain of the wallet. In other words, so we can do our part by doing a little French drain and having water to drain where it should go. Into all the where it goes into the pipes, but there's only so much water the pipes can take at a time. Being in New Orleans, you know how the pumping system works, but try to do less stress than possible.
Yeah, like a lot of the organizations that we might be name dropping, like Groundwork or Greenlight or Waterwise or us, you know, we just started focusing on water management 5 or 10 years ago. Like, I think even Thrive. So, like, 5, 10 years ago, you didn't see green contractors like Mastodon or, you know, Evans and Leiter. So it's definitely growing in popularity. It's growing in common knowledge. And we're just learning more. And I mean, the Sewage and Water Board and Army Corps will definitely be able to talk more about this. But, you know, I don't remember hearing about all these wetlands restoration that they're doing now and, you know, trying to focus more on mitigating climate change, recognizing how that is affecting us, you know, as a coastal community. I just feel like the conversation wasn't really circling around that 20 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, when I started out in this field a little over 10 years ago, I remember, you know, like sitting at the Sewage and Water Board office with Marcia St. Martin trying to explain what a rain garden was. If you would have told me that I was going to be sitting here with a Sewage and Water Board shirt on telling you about the work that we're doing, then I probably would have laughed you out of the room. But you know, it's been a completely different change, and I think that the two biggest things that I think have changed the most are just sort of a general literacy around water issues in New Orleans. So you know, whereas 10 years ago we were, you know, sort of activists pushing for these large institutions to make change, and now we're talking about, you know, City Council demanding that, you know, we do more on green infrastructure because the public is demanding it and people are campaigning on it. And so it's become, you know, a really popular public issue. And I think the other thing has just been the exposure of the decrepit state of our infrastructure over the last 10 years. I think that people didn't really realize at that time that things were quite as bad as they are. And I don't think that people really realized how we got in the situation that we're in now where, you know, for instance, our revenues today are less than they were in the 80s by inflation because we went so long without rate increases in the 80s and 90s. And so now that bill is coming due. And so I think that that's, you know, becoming more realized in this community and especially at the federal level with the stuff the administration's doing on federal funding for projects. But I think those are probably the biggest changes I've noticed in my career.
I would say in the last 20 or maybe 40 years, I think the biggest change was the recognition that subsidence is made worse by overpumping. And I don't know if it falls into this 10 or 20 window, but I think it's still something that is being fully recognized only with the emergence of long-term data sets that show how soils become dehydrated and oxidize when they're overly dried, and so why it's necessary to keep water tables higher as much as possible. And then, of course, since Hurricane Katrina, I think the recognition of, you know, coming out of the Dutch dialogues and leading into the urban water plan, the need to live with water, I think those are sort of all among the biggest water management changes in New Orleans recently. I think that with green infrastructure, with any infrastructure, it's always more complicated than it looks at first. And I think that this nascent business ecosystem that's really just growing right now is going to provide so much information that we're going to learn about how these systems work, how they're managed and maintained. I think sometimes I'm a big fan of green infrastructure. I'm a big fan of ecosystems. I think sometimes there is a little bit of over-optimism about what kinds of problems can be solved with green infrastructure alone. And I think that everyone would rather have a nice vegetation band next to their house than a wall. And I think that this is something that we're still learning about. You know, how do these systems perform out into the future? How do they work in concert with the gray infrastructure pieces? What kind of maintenance are they going to take? What kind of expertise, what kind of workforce is it going to take to maintain these green systems? And I'm excited. I think it's something that we're going to learn a lot more about going forward. So I feel like the 10 to 20 year window is sort of interesting because I feel like we're kind of more in it now. You know, the lessons of what we're doing right now, I think, are going to be just absolutely critical going forward in the next sort of generation plus, how our systems look, you know, how our built and natural environments look.
Maybe you could expand upon that and say, how will it change in the next 10 years, maybe? Or, I mean, any number. How will it change in our lifetime?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a hard question, I'm sure, but what do y'all think from your perspective of what you do every day to protect us from water issues?
Well, I think Yogi Berra might have said that predictions are always difficult, especially when the future is involved. And in the climate preparedness world, the kind of the irony that we're constantly dealing with is that every year, every month, you know, we learn more. And so, in a sense, we're getting more understanding and sort of less uncertainty over time, although not less uncertainty every day, because sometimes you find out about things you didn't know. So your uncertainty gets bigger for a little bit and then it gets smaller again. But at the same time as we're going along, the climate is changing more. So it's like we're never catching up. We're never getting to a point where a given number of years in the future, we're more sure what's going on. So I think that where we're going is going to be all about how we can operate in this deep uncertainty. How can we embrace uncertainty, and instead of hiding it or running away from it, how can we make decisions where we're going to have, you know, low regrets, we're going to have many different kinds of benefits, we're going to be in, you know, good shape no matter how things play out within the reasonably plausible range of what we think things might look like. And I think that is sort of the next frontier of how do you get away from trying to pinpoint what's going to happen before you make a decision and find ways to make decisions collaboratively, you know, with the whole community, with lots of different benefit types considered.
From your perspective, anyone else want to tackle that one? What is it going to be like in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years?
I don't know what it's going to be like, but where we could kind of move towards is start looking at multiple benefits. Gray infrastructure is great. We couldn't be here the way we've built, you know, our society without it. But, you know, other types of infrastructure that will have multiple benefits outside of just stormwater management, because gray infrastructure is only really great for managing our stormwater. But if we can start looking at, you know, parking lots as not a necessity, start building a city that is for people first and, you know, cars second, bike lanes, you know, just once you start designing your city in a way that's looking for multiple benefits, you just end up with something different than what we have. Also, I guess working towards net zero, since that's something we should be working towards soon, mitigating climate change.
Yeah, and that's one of the positive things about green infrastructure is that you have stacked functions. You know, a parking lot can hold thousands and thousands of stormwater, you know, so stormwater runoff. Or a park. So many different applications.
Future bills. I mean, if you're building buildings, building grocery stores, one of the biggest regrets, and I had nothing to do with it, was when They build Costco's out there. I mean, that's too much concrete. I mean, that'd have been a perfect site. Great example for green infrastructure. If they'd have done pavers there instead of all of the concrete.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing just more sustainable products and more product options. I mean, I feel like every day I'm like asking myself questions about like the sustainability of like what we use. You know, for a lot of our retention systems, we're using limestone. Where does limestone come from? I mean, we use sand. It's river sand. Does it come from Reggie?
Yeah. From the spillway. The river leaves it in the spillway for us.
But we're now using the glass from Glass Half Full too, which is
Right.
great. Willie, based on what you just said and what Arian said earlier about individuals have to be able to retain 1.25 per
inches per hour.
Thank you. I need to commit that to memory. What is it for businesses? So when you're building for businesses, what are they? Is there a plan? Is there part of the permit?
It's the same 1.25, right? For the city, I think it's the city.
Single-family properties are not required to hold the 1.25 inches. It's only commercial properties and multifamily properties.
And so what is the amount? Or just they have to be net zero?
So the requirement is that you have to detain the first inch and a quarter of rain that falls in that first hour, and your runoff rate can't be higher than pre-development for a 10-year storm.
Is it enforced?
I don't think it is.
You would know that question better than us.
I no longer work for the city of New Orleans. I don't want to speak for them. I wrote the code, but I'm not involved in the enforcement today. I do see a lot of projects though that have stormwater built in. You know, you look like, for instance, I was just at the new Rouse's on Ferret Street the other day, and all the parking stalls there are permeable concrete, which is a requirement that all parking stalls have to be built with permeable pavement.
Okay. The last question is, what are the most critical changes that need to be made in our communities, and how can citizens contribute?
So this one, I'm most excited to hear what my fellow panelists have to say. I've been really racking my brain on this one. I just wrote a list. So we'll see if everyone agrees with my list.
My thoughts were we're a drop in the bucket as far as the the total solution, the long-term solution, because, these guys have a large part to play in what happens with what we do in residences and small commercial projects. But I think that education is key right now, because a lot of people just don't know. We're very ignorant to some of the things that we could be doing to be living more sustainably. And green infrastructure is definitely, especially in our urban environment, something that we should be installing everywhere. And citizens, as far as us here getting involved, I mean, you got some great resources here. FYI, Urban Conservancy, WaterWise, Soul. There's lots of ways to get involved, but I would just say if you're interested, just start there. Master Naturalists, just start by getting involved and asking those hard questions. That's how Louisa started spurring my interest in all of this, because I thought it was some kind of, when they said French drain, I thought it was some kind of bidet or something. I don't know what it was. But yeah, so what about you, Mr. Willie?
I just feel the same thing. Community need to be educated, know how, take interest, come to Thrive, learn about it, help clean out your catch basins at your house, do a lot of rainwater. It rains a lot, get a barrel. It brings me back. Back in the days, my mom used to put a bucket outside to catch rain. Like, something going on with you? Why you got a bucket in the rain? To catch the rainwater, to put on the plants, like she was thinking way ahead of time, And it makes sense to me now because I think about those things. And they actually caught water in the barrel coming out the drainage. I'm like, wow, so here it is, 40, 50 years old. I'm telling my age now. But yeah, 50 years later, 60 years later, here we are talking about saving water. Dr. George Washington said, people in the U.S. are the world most wasteful peoples in the world. And we still are wasting a lot of water, not doing nothing with the water or how to retain it, to let it drain later. And it could be healthier for us, even with stone water, it picks up everything, The gasoline has been spilled, the grease that someone to throw down the catch basin, the grass, I saw a guy doing that the other day, and I know he got real upset with me. But I see you doing that again, I'm going to report you. Taking this grass and putting it down the drain. Do you realize we live in New Orleans? We got cars down there, everything, so. But yeah, if the community get involved, get educated, but I think we need to educate them. But today's world, the phone right at your hand, Google. You can do a lot with it. But I'm like Aaron, when I first started hearing about it.
People don't know what they don't know.
Right,
So,
that's right, they can't.
You're right. So we need to educate. Yeah, I'll keep going, but I have a follow-up question for y'all because I want to know how we can educate people of, different age groups and different communities and things like that too. That's important.
Well, I think it should just be in schools. It's the easiest way to get it started and make sure everyone learns it is that just have water literate children telling adults what's up. Yeah, that'd be a good place to start.
Yeah, I guess I was looking forward to this question too about critical changes that need to be made and how people can contribute. I think that like I was saying earlier, I think that the last 10 years have really exposed a lot of our weaknesses, and I think that we are long overdue for a conversation about how we want to adapt and fix our systems. And I think that for instance, in the drainage side of the house for us, on an annual basis, we run a $50 to $60 million deficit. And of course, we can't run a deficit, so that just means we're deferring costs. And so that's $60 million worth of improvements in the system that just aren't happening, that need to happen on an annual basis. And that's how we end up with, pumps that are failing and power systems that don't work and feeders that don't work and all kinds of, problems in the system is we just have to keep deferring that maintenance because we can't invent money out of thin air. And so I think we really, yeah, you guys can, but we can't. Congress can for you, but, it's a huge, huge problem. And the fact that, we get all of our revenue from drainage from property taxes alone, a lot of folks don't realize that drainage doesn't appear in your water bill. No penny of any money that you pay in your monthly water bill goes towards drainage. And there's a huge proportion of people in the city who don't pay for drainage because they don't pay property taxes. And most of those are, the institution at the building that we're sitting in today. It includes, the Archdiocese. It includes lots of nonprofit-owned properties. And so, there really needs to be a conversation about the equity in that system and how we want to be able to fund the improvements that need to be made at the larger scale so that we can also help out the smaller scale folks as well and make sure that it's equitable for all of us.
Well, I feel like when it comes to managing water and managing flood risk, everyone has a part to play. It's really the whole chain of federal, state, local, nonprofit, educational, down to the individual. Everyone has a piece of that management. And for citizens, for individuals, I think education is key, but I think just communication is key. One thing that the Corps of Engineers has done in the last 10, 15 years is change the language that we use. We try not to use the word protection anymore. It gives people a sense that there's no risk. And of course, there can never be no risk. There can never be a sure thing. So we talk about risk management. And risk, when people, instead of talking about a 100-year event, a 100-year flood, which makes people think that it only happens once every 100 years on the century, we talk about a 1% annual chance event or annual probability event. But once you start using more and more syllables, some people are already lost. And I think it's really helpful for citizens to talk to your neighbors, talk to your family, help them understand. Because it's confusing enough to talk about a 1% annual chance, but with climate change, the chances are changing over time. So, I think we're all aware, this flood that has a 1% chance of happening in a year, it's got like a 25% chance of happening in a 30-year mortgage. Well, just start accelerating that chances, exponentially, and now that communication just became exponentially more difficult. So you can all help by educating yourselves and by helping educate your family, your neighbors, your community, people who may need help understanding that they may need to get insurance. They may need to get a rain barrel. They may need to have an evacuation plan. They may need to have somewhere to move their car. These are all things that we can help each other do. And I think no matter what we choose to do on the infrastructure front, those kind of community building, communication building of activities will always be important.
Any other panelists want to say a statement about the critical changes?
I think touching on the equity piece, who has access to stormwater management or to get installations performed? Are there different communities being left out of that, out of the education piece and out of the monetary incentivization? Programs like FYI through Urban Conservancy, provides a grant. I wonder what that would look like, on a federal level or a city level, so that people do have access to that if maybe they make below a certain amount or something like that. And there are other organizations as well that I think touch on, like, not even touch it, but that's like what they talk about. Water Collaborative, I feel like, is trying to address that equity issue in a lot of their discussions that they're having. Going back to that other question, the 10 to 20 years, like even Water Collaborative, I saw go from being in a living room, people just discussing issues with water, and now it's like this full-fledged organization. The other component, I think, as far as citizens' contribution is maintenance to these systems. If there's just public access to it, I think Friends of Lafitte on the Greenway is really great with volunteer opportunities like Soul, where citizens can come out and learn about these systems and how to maintain them over time. Because that's a really big piece as well, is that these systems get installed, but then nobody's upkeeping them. Not nobody, but
that Parks and Parkway, who do keep up with those, I know that there were some issues where they were mowing down some of these native grasses that were supposed to be filtering and detaining and retaining kind of things that Sam was talking about. And so if they're not educated as to what to do, then you've just spent all this money and time and effort, and then it's mowed over in 5 seconds. So
happens to us.
Yeah. But I mean, this is a start, and I guess it's kind of the reason that we went with the 10 or 20 years, because there could have been any time frame, how has it changed? But I sense it has really changed a lot in the last 10, 20 years because of, well, of course, Katrina is what made all of us kind of wake up and go, oh my gosh, we need to figure this out. And then the Dutch dialogues and the Wagoner and Ball's idea of living with water, and then all the new businesses, nonprofits, et cetera, that are doing all this work to help make a difference. I mean, it was the reason I wanted to move back to New Orleans, because it's exciting, all the positive things that are happening, but there's so much more that needs to be done, right? I mean, that's a silly statement. There's so much more that we could do. But the big thing is, I of course, wanted to bring the feds and city in here, well, city utility, because I hear people complaining and blaming, and you're doing your job that you are supposed to do. Well, with some exceptions, but we'll leave that for the Q&A part. No, but the point is that we all have a role that we can and should play. We love this city. We embrace this city for all that she has to offer us, and we have to figure out if we're going to live with water or if we're going to move. I mean, really, that's the decision now, and I'm living with water. I don't know about y'all, but I'm going to figure it out and figure out how to retain it. So I just wanted to add that statement there and see if y'all have any comment about that. And all the people who are here learning from you, tell us, what can we do? Volunteer. Where do we find that information? There's the Water Collaborative, but there's not one place to go to find out all this information. So what can we do? Give us some solutions.
One place to go?
One or two.
Ready NOLA is a pretty good place to start, right? I don't know. Ready NOLA? Do y'all know Ready NOLA? Is it NOLA Ready? NOLA Ready.
Yeah, NOLA Ready.
It's a good place to start. Sign up for their text messages. They have interesting text messages. And they have a list of all they try to have a list of all the organizations and information around town. Sturgeon Water Board, too. I always go on y'all's website and, read about you. You put a lot of information up there, so it's another great place to start.
Yeah, I would similarly suggest NOLA Ready has a page called, or a whole portal called Ready for Rain that I think is probably the best version of a one place for stormwater management.
Yeah, I was going to tell you to call Sam.
You can call me. I will chat for hours.
I think in terms of urban stormwater management, I think the organizations represented here are always good places to start for information. In terms of what you can do, I think I would be remiss as the federal representative here if I didn't say, call your congressperson. I mean, it sounds cliche, but that's basically my board of directors. And they tell us what to do. And it can sound, sometimes it's daunting. I mean, there's a lot of people competing for their attention, but if you don't do it, who's going to do it? So if you go in person, that's more effective than calling, and if you call, it's more effective than emailing. And if you ever find yourself in DC and want to go see the Smithsonian with the family or something, stop in their office if they're there. You'd be surprised how often, if they're available, they'll be willing to meet with you. So I know it sounds like it's a long way removed from water management, but like I said, someone's got to do it.
This is Dana Ines from the Urban Conservancy.
Candidates that are running now for City Council, we are working with the Water Collaborative and the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana to organize a candidate forum, runoff forum on November 30th. And so we can make sure that we get information out in all sorts of ways, but it's at the Broad side in public. It will also be streamed, but it is we're calling it the water runoff. So it's very focused on water issues, both coastal and stormwater management and the third thing I can't remember, but it's focused on the issues relating to everything we're talking about tonight. So there's a local tie-in as well to that advocacy piece with the political side.
I probably should have mentioned that.
Using the word equity is a very powerful, when you're bringing people together, trying to unite the community. You've got to make it very clear from up front that we're talking about everyone. And the more that word is used, I think the more powerful it is for people to understand that this is a movement to improve the community. So I congratulate you on using that language.
So we're going to have an opportunity for Q&A now, and Jimmy, raise your hand, Jimmy. He's going to be on that side of the room. He's going to come to you if you would like to ask a question to the panelists. You can ask either, a blanket question or direct your question. And then over here, Abby's going to be walking around as well. So all you have to do is raise your hand. I'm going to get it started by, there's a question that was sent in through YouTube where the question is permeable concrete appropriate for sidewalk usage in residential areas? Yeah. So the answer is yes. Good. You want to elaborate at all? Or is there a place where we can see it anywhere in the city?
So if you go to the neighborhood around Parkway Bakery, the city installed permeable concrete sidewalks throughout that entire neighborhood.
Yeah, Dookie Chase.
Dookie Chase has them at the restaurant also.
So does the Greenway.
Yeah, along the Greenway too.
Concrete still have to be vacuumed regularly?
Yes, ma'am. That's something that they recommend doing. I believe it's like once a year. I believe once a year they recommend cleaning the concrete.
Do the installers provide that? Do the installers provide that service?
That would depend on who your contractor is. I don't have a vac truck, so I wouldn't be able to do it. But there are people who privately contract out to do that sort of work.
Thank you.
Who was that guy? Was it Twin Shores?
Well, just following up on that, I wondered if it cost more or less than regular concrete.
It does.
It does.
Yeah.
A lot more?
More. It does cost more. I wouldn't, you could probably say better than I could with percent more that it would cost.
About 30% more?
Yeah.
I believe it's like 30%.
Traditional concrete has also gone up too. Material prices have been all over the place in construction.
During the pandemic,
so
yeah.
Hopefully there's more incentive now.
Tyler, I had a question for you. Did I understand you to say that New Orleans has a code requiring commercial businesses to maintain the 1.25 inches of rainwater on their own property?
Yeah, it's for new development or redevelopment. So there's, for instance, like Costco, when it was built, that requirement didn't exist at that time. So they are not currently required, but if that site were to be redeveloped, then it would be required.
Do you see that being extended to private home ownership?
No. I think that in some ways there are plenty of ways that you can incentivize or in this case not necessarily incentivize but force new construction of homes to hold water. 1.25 inches probably isn't the right number for a single family homeowner lot, particularly in sort of the older portions of New Orleans where you have maybe like a 30 by 100 lot. It's really difficult to achieve that.
So that maybe a subdivision.
Maybe a new certainly in a new subdivision today they would be required. But unfortunately very few new subdivisions are being built in New Orleans these days.
Yeah, I live on the North Shore.
Yeah, okay.
We
Yeah,
have
this
a
is
lot
just in the city of New Orleans.
Being built and
right.
Very serious flooding situations occurring because of that.
Yeah.
Getting back to permeable concrete, is there any financial assistance or tax credits available if you install that?
Oh, not here.
No.
Should be, though.
Unfortunately. Yeah, right.
This question's mostly for Mr. Anthrop. Is that okay? What are your thoughts on, I get that you're probably biased in this, but what are your thoughts on privatized water? And do you think it's better to be privatized or a public water source? For the general public, not for for the general public.
Well, I can only speak for myself. As a a civil servant of, at this point, over 8 years. I think that there's a lot of value to public institutions. I think that it means that we're much more accountable to the communities that we serve. It also means that we don't derive a profit from the work that we do. And so every cent that we generate through our user fees and the rates that we charge our customers go back into investments in that system and the generation of the services that we provide. When you privatize an entity, that means there's going to be some sort of profit that's derived from that service. And I just don't think personally that something that's as critical as water, that I think is a human right, should have a profit derived from it.
So what do we know about what permeable pavement or pavers does for actual subsidence? I'm very interested in understanding how it allows New Orleans to not sink any further than we've already sunk. And then also the difference between, there's a lot of repaving going on right now in the city, which is a little frustrating because everyone complains about the lumps and bumps in our roadways, but doesn't understand why it happens. And so I was wondering if y'all could answer that, anyone on the panel.
There's a couple different reasons that the roads are the way they are, and sometimes that can be from sewage leaks as well, which he could explain that better than me. So ultimately we have this dense clay soil that is the result of thousands and thousands of years, probably millions of years of sedimentary deposit, and that's just how this muck soil that we have here. It's dense. You can almost make pottery out of it. Well, you can. They used to make bricks out of it. But essentially, this soil, what happens when we pour impervious surfaces on top of it, it doesn't allow the water to hit the soil, and essentially desertification happens underneath that soil. So think of it like a sponge, where if it's wet, the sponge is soft and sort of like pliable. And then it dries out, it's like all crumbly and it just crumbles apart. So that's what happens to the soil underneath traditional concrete.
I was just wondering if there's any data that shows how permeable pavement actually affects this.
Yeah.
If it raises the water table enough that it filtrates into the soil and holds it there and reduces sinking. I know that you were saying, what are the effects? We don't know what the effects are actually of all of this green infrastructure yet, but
I know the EPA has a lot of information. If you go to the government website, they have a lot of information on those numbers and those statistics.
So we have done a lot of work working with, in particular, Dutch scientists on this issue locally. Unfortunately, there's not very much data to suggest that a localized installation of pervious concrete or permeable pavers is going to have any kind of meaningful reduction in subsidence, even in that specific location. Really, the subsidence issue is kind of a much larger issue that has to do with our gray infrastructure drainage system, in that, the pipes that drain the stormwater from the city you've seen these big concrete pipes, particularly around town as they're replacing them. They have like a male end and a female end, and they couple together, but there's a gap that remains between them. That's not sealed, and so as subsidence continues to occur, those pipes start to break apart and the gap gets bigger. And so it actually acts as more of like a French drain within the soil and is constantly draining groundwater out of the system. So what we typically find around the city is that the sort of average daily groundwater level is equal to the drainage pipes, the depth of the drainage pipes in that area. And so really it's less about, the green infrastructure solutions are really less about reducing subsidence and just finding ways that we can more actively manage our gray infrastructure system to help us reduce subsidence. What we would really need to do to make a meaningful impact on subsidence reduction is find a way to essentially allow the pipes in the ground to be full of water during most of the time, and then we would basically pump them down in advance of a rain event so that there would be space in them to hold the new water that's coming into the system. So that way you could more actively manage the height of the groundwater in the ground.
If I could just make one point on that too. Sorry, sir.
No, go ahead.
It's also important to remember that that subsidence we're talking about here just under the concrete or at the level of a drain is only the most superficial layer of our geology here. And so there's, the muck soil, that clay soil that we're talking about goes thousands of feet down. And there are at least 6 or 7 or more processes occurring at various levels in that depth, some of which are regional and have been going on for thousands of years. And so the subsidence you observe at the surface level, when you compare it to sea level or to a geodetic datum or something, is really the integral of all of those processes occurring at the same time. So we can work on a few of those. We can make our surfaces more permeable. We can manage our cities' infrastructure differently. But there's really nothing we can do about the really deep stuff. I mean, you go down a few more levels, maybe not pumping as much groundwater or not extracting as much oil and gas, but those things have kind of stopped anyway, at least locally, at least on shore. But when you go deep enough, there's nothing really we can do. And so that's why preparedness is so important. There's mitigation and there's adaptation. And no matter what you might want to do for mitigation, you must also do adaptation, and vice versa. They're really two sides of the same coin.
I live on the North Shore also, and we have, especially in our new subdivisions, they have these retention ponds and detention ponds, and the object is to absorb the rainwater in the local area and hold it and then let it drain off so that it just doesn't flood the streets and so forth. And in some cases, in these new subdivisions, we have lakes. And I would imagine that is, St. Tammany requires that of these new buildings, these new constructions. And I was just wondering if that's at all possible here in New Orleans. I know New Orleans has been around for a long time, and it's, but I mean, is it possible to have these ponds and detention lakes to absorb the water in these major rainfalls?
We do have that in New Orleans East. I mean, there are large portions of New Orleans East that have very little flooding and have very little subsidence because they do have these large sort of man-made bodies of water that are also amenities in the community. At the time, those were actually required by us when those subdivisions were built as a way to attenuate the flow of water from those subdivisions out and reduce flooding in the larger community. I think that does sort of open up a larger conversation, though, around the fact that we are really the only below sea level polder community in the world that doesn't have a lot of surface water. We really keep our water underground, so that contributes to a lot of the groundwater issues and subsidence issues that we have. So, certainly the idea that we could insert more surface water into the city would be beneficial from a number of different perspectives, but also creates a lot of challenges, both in terms of figuring out where to put it, how to keep the water in it, how to keep the water clean and safe so that you're not, you're preventing vector breeding and things like that we don't want to create by introducing more water into the city. But certainly something that needs to be considered.
I had a question. Was someone wanted to say something?
This conversation, the last few minutes, has to do with scale, in part. And so I remember about 2 years ago, Sewage and Water Board Director Corban was in Copenhagen looking at green and gray infrastructure in Copenhagen. And Tegan Wingland from WWNO was interviewing him. I was all excited. And she just pressed him hard on green infrastructure. And I think he was very honest in saying our gray infrastructure, we don't have the power resiliency for the stormwater and also for the water delivery system. So we got all these boil water events and so on. And he wasn't poo-pooing green infrastructure. Like, he's totally understanding, totally committed. But at the same time, just saying, look, the scale is this is the big deal. And it still is. It's remarkable in Hurricane Ida that actually our power held. We didn't have a big rain event, but we didn't go for a month without clean water like Jefferson Parish. I mean, it was pretty remarkable. But anyway, I think I'm always concerned about scale of anything, you know, and that doesn't mean that working locally and at the smallest scale is meaningless. It's just really hard. It's a wicked problem. It's what we call a wicked problem in sustainability science. Anyone have any thoughts about trying to emerge above that besides the fact that we need a bigger tax base so that we can do these things?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head that, you know, my boss, Executive Director Kuban, is very supportive of green infrastructure. He oversaw a massive green infrastructure program in Milwaukee where he came from before this. And, you know, when I worked at the city, I oversaw the city's green infrastructure program. And now that I'm with the Sewage and Water Board, you can probably tell tonight I'm not talking that much about green infrastructure. I'm talking a lot about our water systems more broadly. Because the challenge that we have is, as I said, we're running a huge deficit annually on just operating the pumps and maintaining the pumps. And so as much as green infrastructure is a fantastic solution, and it is the future, and it is what we need to be doing, we can't ignore the fact that the gray infrastructure systems that we have are critical. We cannot just, the green infrastructure is not a solution that can replace gray infrastructure. It can only augment it and take the load off of it. So we're never going to create enough rain gardens and detention facilities around the city that we can remove the pumps. In fact, with climate change, there may be the need to build even more pumps in addition to green infrastructure if we continue getting these storms. So we have 9 inches of rain in an hour 2 or 3 times a year. And we just don't have the resources to make those improvements today. And so, you know, as much as we love, you know, seeding the industry with little bits of money that we can find here and there, we support the organizations and we can show up at events like this and say this is amazing. When it comes to actually putting shovels in the ground, we just can't do it because we don't have the resources.
Yeah, I think scale is the key. I think you nailed it. When the Corps of Engineers does a project, we always do it with a local sponsor. It's usually a state or a city or a port authority or something. And so we partner with these local entities to come up with a solution that's mutually agreeable for both the federal interest and the local interest. And we see a lot of our local partners now wanting green infrastructure. And they want, you know, if you're talking about a coastal storm risk management project, they don't want to have a levee or a wall. They want a forest or something. And so it's really hot right now, but what people don't seem to understand yet is the scale required. You know, there's this old rule of thumb that's not really true, but it still gets repeated that like every 3 miles of marsh knocks down 1 foot of storm surge. It's, you know, that can't be true because it's too simple, right? But even if we imagine it were true, that means that to get 20 feet of storm surge knocked down, you would need 60 miles of marsh, you know? You would have to fill Lake Pontchartrain with marsh to have that kind of an effect. And so think about the cost of building 60 miles of marsh, the environmental impact, because you're really replacing one ecosystem with another one. So now you have to deal with that impact. You know, so the scale is the key part. You can't have a levee 1 foot high and expect it to work, and you can't have a buffer, you know, 10 inches wide and expect it to work either. So, like Tyler was just saying, you know, you have to build these things to work, and you have to understand the importance of scale and how they're going to work together to make it function.
And so, you know, the feds and then Sewage and Water Board talking about that. But so, you know, I agree. I mean, we can't just solve our issues with green infrastructure. It's got to be a combination. And that's why having your organizations, your business, contributing to this and telling us how we can contribute on our own is so important. So, I mean, that's agreed. We need everyone to play a role.
Okay, my question was, I know that putting in green infrastructure like permeable pavers and things like that is a bit more expensive than like traditional gray infrastructure. I was curious if people are willing to, and businesses are willing to invest in this, will it last them any longer than gray infrastructure?
It depends on what you build. So like there are some like popular forms instead of permeable concrete having pavers that allow water to go inside. Now you don't have to tear up the entire sidewalk to fix it if part of it breaks. You can just tear up that section. So that can last longer. And I mean, most green infrastructure would be like a rain garden. So like a rain garden versus a regular garden, you know, it's gonna last about the same, except I guess native plants will not need to be replaced as often. So it's a little bit less maintenance on that part. But I guess it depends on which green infrastructure you're talking about and where you're putting it.
You keep talking about green infrastructure. Tens of millions of dollars were allocated to that Mirabue project. And year after year, absolutely nothing happens. So is that money gone, or did it get siphoned off, or what happened to that whole project?
I mean, I can tell you what I knew when I was working at the city, but I don't speak for the city anymore. As far as I know, those funds are still obligated, but you know, it's had delays due to design issues and bidding. But that's really all I can say.
Years have
I just
gone
don't
by.
know. I'm just as frustrated as you are. Oh, the cyber attack.
But that wasn't $100 million that was allocated. That's just small. And the second thing is, yeah, well, that's not that's nothing that's been done of that money. And the cyber attack, that's like saying the dog ate my homework. I mean, that's ridiculous.
But there is a lot that is going on. And, so if you look at the CAP program, what does CAP stand for?
Community Adaptation Program.
Yeah.
The Dillard wetland is being worked on right now too, and lots of others. And that's just for me reading their website and talking to a couple of officials.
Hello. I'm with Recycling Farms Coalition. We're an urban farm and food justice nonprofit in Central City. I'm also an AmeriCorps member, so it's nice seeing some alumni on the table right now. My question is if any of y'all can touch on the role that urban agriculture can play in water management in the city, from small scale of backyard and community gardens to more larger operations like Veggie out in the east and Grow Dat in a city park, and any challenges that urban farmers face with water management.
Yeah. It's funny that you asked that question. I feel like a lot of our recent projects have been community gardens and placemaking, and also taking into account water retention. So we try to install systems that involve that. One system is called a hugelkultur, and that's incorporating digging into the ground, doing several different layers, and it's kind of like a self-watering system where you're directing water into a garden, but then building the garden itself up, and it takes many different forms. One we did more traditional. If you look them up, I can't. It's a hard thing to describe, but it's a mounded raised garden, and then underneath it, it's dug out, and it's meant for water storage and watering your plants. And another system so it's technically a hugelkultur, but we're building these vertical gardens right now out in the lower ninth, and it's all meant for edible growing. And we're trying to figure out how we want to water these systems because we're building them upwards. And how do you want that water to hold in it? And we're thinking like pipes, that go into it. Water in, and then it's slowly discharging water into the gardening system. But many different forms. I mean, a lot of times in these gardens, we're trying to also attract pollinators. We're trying to attract bees and other insects, birds. So we'll be planting water gardens as well, rain gardens in tandem with edible systems.
Do you think the cost of doing some of these green infrastructure projects will come down as the technology evolves and as the demand for it increases?
I think that's a really good question for you all, but
I just read something on futurology or something like that, and they're I'm going to butcher it, but they gave some stat about how sustainable products are predicted to drop in the next 10 years. I don't know any specifics on that, but
definitely, as there's more demand, I guess you can buy in larger. There'll be a huge problem right now with a lot of these projects is getting supplies. So, as there's more demand, there would probably be more supplies, maybe, and then you could buy in bigger bulk. And I think that's where a lot of the price comes from. It's just the raw material.
Hey y'all. I remember in elementary school, I was at the water fountain, and my friend came up to me and was like, "You're drinking toilet water?" And I was like, "Huh? That's ridiculous." But the ridiculous idea is that we're not drinking toilet water. We're pumping drinking water into the toilets, right? So ideally, you'd want to be using secondary wastewater, gray water, all that. So I just wanted to know, what would be your dream goals in terms of wastewater usage, or what kind of fantasy do you see for wastewater usage in the house, or ways that we can be more water conscious, even if it's radical?
There's definitely these very large cisterns that some other cities use that cycle rainwater that is being captured into things not potable water, but into things like your toilet tank, because really you're right, that doesn't need to be drinkable. So I think it's illegal here, actually. I don't know.
It is currently illegal here.
So,
I guess in the state, it's not, you can't use gray water in buildings in Louisiana. I think though that the question that I always ask about this is in an area where our source of water is one of the most plentiful rivers on earth, why would we not just use the water source that we have? We compared to our, I talked to my peers. I was talking to someone that works at a utility in Tempe where they said they get a half an inch of rain a year. So like there, absolutely, that makes 100% sense that, we should be doing whatever we can to make sure that every drop of water is used the most efficient way possible. Here, because we have such a plentiful source and the treatment process is so efficient and the way that we distribute it is so efficient, creating a secondary system is actually less efficient. Because you'd have to be creating either new pipes that are going to send a different source of water around, like they have in Santa Monica and places in California where they have gray water district systems, or you're creating more individualized treatment programs at specific facilities, which is going to be way more energy intensive than the present system that we operate. So we have an abundance of water here, and so it doesn't necessitate the use of gray water. I think in some cases, as like a demonstration or ways to sort of, use them in specific opportunities, it makes a lot of sense. But broadly here, there's really no reason for us to pursue it.
I did my master's in Tucson, and in Tucson they do have a secondary system to pipe gray water, reclaimed water, mostly for irrigating. And it requires a big investment. You have to have a whole second set of pipes running all over town, not to mention all the pumps and all the infrastructure that has to be put in to run that. So, we're lucky that of all the troubles we have to face, of all the challenges we have to face in New Orleans, we don't have water scarcity to deal with. I would still say that it's an idea that is at least worth thinking about only because of the water-energy nexus. So purifying water does take energy. There's a nexus between water, energy, and climate change. But when you think about the embodied carbon of the energy that goes into making your water drinkable, just to put it in your toilet, you have to compare it to what you would do instead. So what's the embodied carbon of all those extra pipes and all the extra pumping and all the extra infrastructure you'd be thinking about installing? So I'm glad you're thinking about it. I don't think it's a great fit for our particular city, but it's certainly something that a lot of people, a lot of places are thinking about.
And I will say, I do think the idea of an individual system, like just your household, is cool. Once again, I don't know what the entire carbon impact of building a giant cistern on your roof and then using gravity to pump that through the gray water of your own personal household. I mean, you can always just get a rain barrel and fill up a bucket and fill up the back of your toilet if you want to do that. That's what surf did for a few months because they didn't have any water. So that's what people, that's always a way to do it. And it would be interesting to see what the energy and impacts of that would be if a lot of people were doing that, because it's definitely doable, just a little bit more effort. No pipes involved, though, just buckets.
All right, we have one more question from YouTube, so I'm going to read it to y'all. Is soil runoff depletion part of the scope of the water infrastructure being discussed here? Soil runoff depletion / depletion.
I don't understand the question.
Maybe soil
Well,
erosion.
I can't reword it because it's not my question. It came from YouTube, but I'm guessing soil runoff. So instead of it being absorbed into our system, how we get all the runoff, and I'm guessing it's because of our clay, right? Because the clay doesn't. I'm going to let the experts answer it.
I mean, I think about like construction, and what we're doing when we're actually constructing things. What are we doing because a lot of runoff comes from construction sites. Yeah. We see that all over the city. So what are we doing to mitigate the runoff while we're installing these systems and making sure that we're putting wattles in front of our storm drains, and that they're staying there, and making sure that sand and aggregate isn't also going down there. Replacing things smartly.
And I can only talk from like a smaller scale, but while residential green infrastructure is not going to prevent flooding when the levees break, I do know soil erosion on your personal property can be very annoying. And so forms of that can help prevent that. Adding more plants with thicker roots are going to at least help prevent that surface soil runoff, so you don't have to keep on buying bags of soil from God knows where to replenish your yard.
If they're talking about grass, then that's a whole different Ontario, right?
Is it illegal to put the grass in the drain and the leaves and everything?
Yes.
That's
legal
what
to
I
put.
thought. Just curious. We're right at 8 o'clock, and you filled the time very well. You helped us really understand and get a better grasp on things from my perspective. And I want to put one more thing up here. Oh, right when my computer died. I was going to show y'all, we have, this has been streamed on YouTube. And so I know the Master Naturalist asked us if we would put the link on how to watch this onto their website. But I can also post that in our social media avenues and share it with you all as well so that you can watch it or share it with your friends and family, those kinds of things. But I sincerely want to thank our panelists for giving up time on your, during your week and coming and sharing your expertise with us. You all were invited because you made such, your organizations and what you do makes such an impact on all of our lives, and definitely with the research that we're doing recently. So thank you so much. I want to thank all of my students who were they volunteered to help out tonight and ask the questions and help out with the Q&A. So thank y'all. Y'all are the best. You know you are. And then our guests for coming tonight, thank you for your interest. And we love to put on seminars and educational roundtables, panels like this. So stay in touch with us. Let us know what you're interested in learning about. And, Janelle and the Master Naturalist, definitely it's great to partner with you. So thank you so much for always supporting us and coming here and co-hosting and working in collaboration with us. I'm guessing the panelists are probably tired, ready for dinner since we couldn't feed you. But maybe if you can catch them on the way out, if you have one or two more questions. The Master Naturalist, if you missed the intro, there's a table up there with Nature Store information, Nature Shop, and what else? Name badges if you are newly certified, and volunteer opportunities. And then we also have some shirts left over and some caps and water bottles up there from our project this summer. And we'd love for y'all to rep Loyola Academy for us. So grab one on your way out if you would like, and be safe going home. Thanks for coming.